You don't fit the vibe, my sister-in-law laughed, banning me from the formal dinner. So I legally liquidated her trust fund vanity project and watched her beg. Original post. I'm Evan, I'm 34 years old, and if you had told me a year ago that I would be sitting in the back row of a gilded ballroom at my own brother's wedding as an uninvited guest, sipping a $300 glass of vintage champagne while watching my family pretend I didn't exist, I probably would have laughed. My brother and I were close once. Not in the inseparable, best friend kind of way, but in the quietly dependable sense. We didn't talk every single day, but he always had my back. Or, at least, that is the lie I told myself for 3 decades. Our family isn't rich, we aren't scraping by, either. We grew up solidly middle class in a quiet, aggressively normal suburb. The kind of place where people mow their lawns at the exact same time every Sunday morning and engage in passive-aggressive warfare over holiday decorations in the neighborhood HOA group chat. Our parents were the quintessential hard-working types. My mom was a floor nurse who worked grueling 1-2-hour shifts, and my dad owned a small, moderately successful HVAC repair business. They raised us to believe in keeping our heads down, doing the hard work, and showing up for family no matter what. I took that philosophy to heart more than anyone else, maybe a little too much. For my entire life, I was the quiet one in the family. I wasn't painfully shy, just observant. I liked to watch how things worked, how people operated. Meanwhile, my older brother Leo was the undeniable golden child. He was charismatic, athletic, loud, and always the center of gravity in any room he walked into. I was the one people accidentally cropped out of group photos. It never really bothered me. I had my own goals, my own path, and my own quiet ambitions. I studied advanced finance, worked 8-0-hour weeks in my 20s, and took massive, calculated risks. The kind of stuff nobody in a middle-class family really notices or understands until it pays off. And recently, it paid off in a way that defies comprehension. I had spent the better part of the last 6 years building a boutique private equity and investment firm from the ground up. Nothing flashy on the surface, just incredibly smart, patient, ruthless moves. A few angel investments in tech startups here, a well-timed acquisition of a logistics chain there, and suddenly, I wasn't just Evan the quiet accountant. I was Evan, the managing partner of a firm with hundreds of millions in assets under management. I was the guy with real, terrifying leverage. But no one in my family knew that. Not because I was maliciously keeping secrets, but because they literally never asked. I learned early on that whenever I tried to bring up my work at the dinner table, their eyes would glaze over. My job wasn't flashy like Leo's career in high-end corporate marketing. I didn't have viral LinkedIn posts, I didn't go to destination conferences in Dubai, and I didn't wear designer labels. My parents genuinely thought I still did mid-level tax preparation for local businesses, and I eventually just stopped bothering to correct them. What did it matter? I didn't need their validation to check my bank balance. Everything changed the moment Leo got engaged to Chloe. Now, Chloe is a presence. She is the kind of person who sucks the oxygen out of a room the second she walks in, and not in a good way. Think reality TV villain energy wrapped in a suffocating layer of passive-aggressive, honey-coated comments. She is undeniably beautiful, I'll give her that. She's tall, poised, and possesses this effortless old money elegance that makes everyone around her feel like they are trying way too hard just by breathing. But behind that perfectly curated smile is a woman who is pathologically aware of social status, class markers, and wealth. And once the engagement was official, it became abundantly clear that Chloe viewed Leo's family as a charity case she needed to aggressively manage and fix. I remember the very first time I met her. It was a Sunday brunch at my parents' modest house. It was a casual, jeans and t-shirts kind of day. Chloe showed up in a designer dress that looked like it belonged at a Hamptons charity gala, wearing $800 sunglasses indoors, and clutching a teacup poodle in a leather carrier. She hugged my mom like she was interacting with a Make-A-Wish child she had just been forced to meet for a photo op. When she finally got to me, she blinked, let her eyes drag up and down my plain gray sweater, smiled a tight, polite smile, and said, "Oh, you're Leo's brother." That was it. Not, "It is so nice to meet you." Not, "Leo has told me so much about you." Just a polite nod, and a crystal clear dismissal. From that exact moment on, I was completely invisible to her, and slowly but surely, that invisibility began to infect the rest of the family. Standard family dinners morphed into exclusive couples nights where I was the awkward odd one out, so they just stopped inviting me. Group chats about wedding planning were, accidentally, created without my number. And every single time I did show up to a family event, Chloe would give me that same polite, chilling smile, treating me like a piece of ugly thrift store furniture she couldn't quite figure out how to move out of her pristine living room. It was subtle at first. Just little things. A backhanded compliment about my car here, a missed invitation there, but the disrespect compounded. The first real, undeniable blow came during one of the major wedding planning meetings at my parents' house. Chloe was holding court at the dining table, talking endlessly about the photo aesthetics. She was explaining how she wanted the pictures to feel elevated, timeless, and strictly like a Vogue editorial spread. She pulled out a massive physical mood board covered in clippings of smiling European models, opulent historic venues, and strict color palettes. She paused, turned to me, and said in a voice dripping with fake sympathy, "No offense, Evan, but you probably wouldn't be comfortable in this kind of setting. It's very curated, very high society." I blinked, genuinely taken aback. "What exactly does that mean?" "Oh, nothing," she chirped, letting out a laugh that completely failed to reach her cold eyes. "Just that the styling and the vibe are a bit upscale. I wouldn't want you to feel out of place or embarrassed next to my family." I looked at Leo, my own brother. The guy I had bled for. He didn't say a single word. He just sat there, staring down at his coffee mug, refusing to make eye contact with me, like he completely agreed with her assessment that I was too pathetic to stand next to him. That night, I drove home in absolute silence. I sat on my couch and stared at my phone for a full hour, debating whether to text him and demand to know what the hell that was about, but I didn't. I swallowed my pride, played the good soldier, and let it slide. Another week went by, and I finally received the official wedding invitation in the mail, except, there was no +1 option, no seating assignment, and no itinerary. Just a single, generic card. I found out later that everyone else in the family received the full luxury suite, names elegantly engraved, gold leaf RSVP cards, custom wax seals, the works. Mine literally looked like a backup copy they had hastily printed at a local FedEx store. It stung far more than I expected it to. Still, I played the game. I showed up for their lavish engagement party, wore a perfectly tailored but understated suit, kept a polite smile plastered on my face, and made small talk. But Chloe made an absolute point of introducing me last to every single person we encountered. "And this is Evan." She would sigh, as if struggling to recall my name. "Leo's brother." And then she would immediately pivot her body away from me and direct the conversation back to someone she deemed important. The final, unforgivable insult came exactly 3 weeks before the wedding. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my corner office on the 40th floor, in the middle of reviewing a massive 9-figure acquisition contract, when my personal phone buzzed. A text from Leo, "Hey, can we talk?" I called him immediately, assuming there was a family emergency. He answered, and his voice was tight, nervous. "Hey, man. So, listen, Chloe has been thinking a lot about the guest list and the flow of the day." I felt my stomach tighten into a knot. "Okay, and?" "She's just really worried about optics, you know? Her family is flying in from all over the world. They are very high-profile people. Politicians, CEOs, old money. She just doesn't want anything to feel off." "Off?" I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. "Yeah, it's just." He hesitated, letting out a heavy breath. "She thinks maybe it's best if you skip the formal wedding photos. And honestly, maybe even the ceremony and the formal sit-down dinner. Just come to the after-party for drinks. There will be way less pressure on you that way." I literally could not speak for a full 10 seconds. The silence on the line was deafening. It felt like someone had physically punched the air out of my lungs. "So, let me get this straight," I finally said, my voice dangerously calm. "I am good enough to stand in the dark at the after-party and drink from the open bar? Just not the part where the important people might actually have to look at me in the daylight? Come on, man, it's not like that," Leo said quickly, backpedaling. She thinks you might not fit the image she's going for. Her family is very particular. You're just not used to these kinds of circles." The image. That word stuck in my brain like a rusty nail. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't beg for my brother to love me. I simply said, "Message received, Leo, noted," and I hung up the phone. I sat in my leather chair for a very long time, just staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline below. I wasn't sad. The sadness had instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. Something fundamental inside me had permanently shifted. All these years, I had bent over backwards to stay quiet, to be the bigger person, to absorb their slights, and to let things slide. I kept my immense success to myself because I didn't need external validation. But in that exact moment, I realized something beautiful and terrifying. Chloe had absolutely no idea who she was dismissing, and neither did my brother. What they didn't know, what literally no one on the planet knew outside of my legal team and a few terrified executives, was that exactly 2 weeks earlier, my firm had finalized a ruthless, aggressive corporate maneuver to become the absolute majority shareholder of Aethelgard Hospitality. Aethelgard was a massive, global luxury travel conglomerate that owned 5-star resorts, private jet charters, and elite country clubs. And it just so happened to be the exact company that Chloe's billionaire father, Richard Sterling, chaired and built his entire identity around. It was a brilliant, quiet acquisition executed through a labyrinth of holding groups. Nothing flashy, completely under the radar, but aggressive enough that I now held 51% of the voting power. I didn't just have a seat at the table. I owned the table, the chairs, and the building the table sat in. Suddenly, I wasn't just Leo's awkward, embarrassing younger brother. I was the one man on earth that Chloe's entire snobby, elitist family had a very real, very desperate reason to fear. But I didn't say a single word. Not yet. Because if they desperately wanted me to be invisible, I was more than happy to let them pretend, right up until the absolute worst possible moment. I didn't respond to any of Leo's follow-up texts after that call. I went completely dark, radio silence. No emotional outbursts, no snide remarks on social media, nothing. And my silence was apparently taken as total submission, because I didn't hear from him for a full week, until our mother finally called me. She didn't know the full story, obviously, she never did. My mother has a pathological need to gloss over conflict, pretending everything is perfectly fine as long as the family shows up and smiles for Sunday dinner. Evan, she said, her voice painfully chipper. Chloe is finalizing the head count for the caterers. You're still coming to the reception for drinks, right? My throat tightened with an emotion that wasn't quite rage, but definitely wasn't peace. I'm not going to the ceremony, Mom, I said flatly. Apparently, I don't fit the luxury aesthetic. Mom let out a short, nervous laugh. What? Don't be silly. Who on earth told you that? Leo did. There was a long, suffocating pause on the line. Then she said, her voice dropping into a careful whisper, Evan, I'm sure it is just a massive misunderstanding. It is not a misunderstanding, I replied. He explicitly told me Chloe doesn't want me in the family photos. She doesn't want me sitting at the formal dinner. She doesn't want me anywhere near her high-profile family. That can't be right, she stammered. But her voice had already gone soft and defeated. I could tell instantly that she knew. She had known all along, or at least suspected it, and she had chosen to say nothing to protect Leo's peace. Maybe you should just call him again. Try to talk it out. Be the bigger person, Evan. For me? No, Mom, I said quietly. There is absolutely nothing left to say. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of corporate warfare and internal realization. I threw myself completely into my work. There were massive restructuring contracts to sign, a hostile merger to finalize, and executive meetings to dominate. But my mind kept drifting back to Leo and Chloe. Every now and then, I would get an automated forwarded message from the family group chat. Pictures of $50,000 floral arrangements, venue sneak peeks, bespoke dress fittings, Chloe smiling radiantly. Leo standing beside her, beaming like a lottery winner. My name never came up in the chat, not a single time. It was as if I had already died, and they had conveniently forgotten to attend the funeral. One night, I was scrolling through the chat and noticed a high-resolution photo Chloe had posted. It was a preview of the seating chart for the formal dinner, meticulously handwritten in gold calligraphy on a massive mirror. I zoomed in on the image, scanning the names. My parents were shoved at a corner table. Leo's groomsmen were front and center. I checked every single table. My name was nowhere on that glass. I took a screenshot and texted it to Leo with one sentence. So, I'm not even getting a physical chair in the room during dinner? He replied 12 minutes later. Bro, it's not like that. Chloe just didn't think it made logistical sense to include you for the formal sit-down part since you aren't in the bridal party. You can still totally join us for the open bar afterward. It'll be fun. I didn't respond, and that was the exact moment the last remaining thread of my loyalty snapped. Not just because I was being excluded from a meal, but because I realized I had spent my entire adult life being the dependable workhorse. I was the one who never caused drama, never demanded the spotlight, never asked for a handout. I was the easy one to ignore. And this was exactly how they viewed me. Not just Chloe, but my own flesh and blood, disposable, embarrassing. Utterly unworthy of occupying a square foot of space at his wedding. I started vividly remembering all the things I hadn't allowed myself to feel over the years. I remembered how, growing up, Leo always got the brand new sports equipment while I wore his battered hand-me-downs. I remembered how he drunkenly crashed my Honda Civic when he was 20, and our parents forced me to cover the $2,000 deductible out of my college savings because Leo has a lot on his plate right now. I remembered how I helped him move out of a fourth-floor walk-up apartment during a torrential thunderstorm, literally dragging his mattress down the street because he forgot to book a U-Haul, and he didn't even buy me a slice of pizza to say thank you. I remembered how he completely missed my college graduation because he mixed up the dates, but I still drove 6 hours through the night to attend his. I remembered how I quietly lent him $6,000 during his first year living in the city because he was drowning in credit card debt, money he never paid back, money I never once asked for, because that is what brothers do, right? They forgive, they absorb the blow, they give grace. But this was entirely different. This wasn't just Leo being a careless, self-centered idiot. This was deliberate, calculated erasure. And it was Chloe orchestrating the entire symphony, with Leo happily playing the role of the obedient, spineless puppet. And the absolute worst part was that they smugly thought they were getting away with it. There is a deeply surreal, almost out-of-body sensation that comes with being maliciously cut out of a family by people who genuinely believe they are vastly superior to you, while simultaneously knowing that you own the majority share of the corporation that literally signs their generational wealth. Because Chloe's father, Richard Sterling, was the legendary chairman of Aethelgard Hospitality. To the public, he was a titan. But behind closed doors, about 3 months before this ridiculous wedding drama even began, Aethelgard's executive board had been in absolute chaos. Decades of gross mismanagement, toxic internal disputes, massively bloated executive salaries, and terrified investors pulling their capital. My firm, Aegis Capital, had swooped in like a vulture. We quietly bought 38% of their outstanding shares through a European partner fund, and another 13% through a domestic shell acquisition. Silent capital. Ghost money. I was not the public face of the transaction. I didn't need my ego stroked in the Wall Street Journal. But by the time Chloe was aggressively texting high-end florists and trying on custom Vera Wang shoes, I legally owned 51% of her entire world. And Richard Sterling had absolutely no idea until one rainy Friday afternoon, just days before the wedding, when I was anonymously invited into an emergency board meeting. I will take the memory of Richard's face to my grave. He was a tall, sharp-jawed, intimidating man, wearing a bespoke navy pinstripe suit like armor. He strode into the mahogany boardroom, scanning the room with arrogant eyes, his gaze passing right over me as if I were a junior IT consultant waiting to fix the projector. Then, the meeting officially commenced. I sat in absolute silence, letting my lead legal counsel run through the terrifying financial introductions. I just waited. Finally, when my name was explicitly read into the official record as the new controlling interest and managing partner of Aegis Capital, Richard Sterling stopped breathing. He turned his head with agonizing slowness, and for the first time in his life, he actually looked at me. I smiled warmly. He did not. After the boardroom cleared out, Richard approached me. He looked like a man who had just been told his parachute was packed with silverware. "Evan, is it?" he said, his voice tight. "You're Leo's younger brother." I nodded slowly, buttoning my suit jacket. "Small world, Richard." He stared at me, his jaw visibly flexing. "You have been incredibly busy, very quiet moves. What exactly are your intentions here, Evan?" I tilted my head, studying him like a bug under glass. "That entirely depends." "On what?" I let the suffocating silence stretch for just 3 seconds longer than was socially acceptable. "On whether your daughter ever manages to apologize for telling me I wasn't high society enough to be allowed in her wedding photos." Richard physically recoiled. He blinked rapidly, the air in the room instantly turning to ice. That was her personal decision. Regarding her special day, he said carefully, trying to maintain his authority. "I know about it, and I respect her wishes." "I know you do," I whispered. He looked deeply uneasy, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for a hidden camera. He didn't know what game I was playing, and he didn't know the rules. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. I simply reached into my pocket, handed him my heavy, matte black business card, the real one, with my name listed as managing partner, and walked out of the room without looking back. For the next 4 days, things were eerily quiet. Then, my mother called me again. Her voice was totally different this time. It wasn't chipper, it was timid, almost terrified. "Evan," she whispered. "Chloe mentioned that you might actually be thinking of showing up to the reception venue on Saturday." I wasn't deemed worthy of the ceremony or the dinner, I said smoothly. "But yes, Mom, I will absolutely be at the reception. I wouldn't want to miss the open bar, right?" She hesitated, her breath hitching. "Evan, please." She is really worried. "Worried about what, exactly?" "About you, causing a scene. Ruining the vibe." I let out a sharp bitter laugh that echoed in my empty apartment. "You mean like standing in the background of a photograph and single-handedly destroying her Vogue aesthetic with my middle-class aura?" "She didn't mean it like that," my mom said automatically, still playing the peacemaker. I just waited in silence. Finally, she broke down and sighed. "Okay. Maybe she did mean it exactly like that. But please, Evan." "Mom," I said gently. "I promise you, I am not going to scream, or yell, or cause a scene." She exhaled a massive sigh of relief. "Oh, thank God, that is so good to hear. But," I added softly, "I will be seen." I hung up the phone. The ripple effect started almost immediately. 48 hours before the wedding, my personal cell rang. It was Richard Sterling, not a corporate board call. A desperate, personal one. He didn't even bother saying hello. "Evan, let's talk man to man," he pleaded. I put him on speaker and continued typing an email. "I'm listening, Richard." He tried to be civil at first. He tried to project the illusion that we were equals, just two wealthy men hashing out a minor misunderstanding. But the absolute sheer desperation bled through every syllable. He asked if I was genuinely planning to attend the wedding. He asked if I was going to make any public announcements. He practically begged me to just be discreet and stay home. I was explicitly told by my brother that I am not welcome at the ceremony. I recited calmly, so I will respect those boundaries. I will be at the reception, quietly, professionally, just an observer. He absolutely hated that answer. He tried a radically new tactic, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Evan, listen to me. Would you consider selling your shares back to my coalition? We would make it incredibly worth your while. A massive premium. Name your price. Let's not make this personal. I smiled into the receiver, though he couldn't see it. But Richard, that is the entire point. It is personal. I ended the call. And so, the day of the wedding finally arrived. The ceremony was held at a breathtaking, historic grand estate about an hour outside the city. It featured towering white marble pillars, impeccably manicured hedge mazes, and a live string quartet playing classical music under a massive silk canopy. I didn't go. I kept my word. Instead, I parked my car on a hill about a half-mile away, completely out of view, and watched through binoculars as the elite guests arrived. Everyone was dressed like modern royalty. Chloe's family arrived in fleets of black SUVs, draped in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Their laughter echoed across the lawn, sounding distinctly expensive. Then, I saw my own parents. They looked incredibly stiff, constantly tugging at their clothes, completely unsure of where they fit in this ocean of wealth. And then, finally, Leo and Chloe appeared on the grand staircase. They were smiling, glowing, kissing for the cameras, utterly oblivious to the storm gathering just over the horizon. They had no idea I was watching. Not yet. Not until the reception. Not until I walked through those double doors. Wearing a bespoke, custom-tailored midnight blue suit that cost significantly more than Chloe's entire bridal gown, confident, uninvited to the dinner, unapologetic. Update 1. The ballroom for the reception looked like a scene aggressively ripped from a billionaire's Pinterest board. There were gleaming crystal chandeliers the size of cars, champagne flutes catching the ambient light, and thousands of fresh white orchids spilling from centerpieces that probably cost more than my parents' annual mortgage payments. Every single detail screamed unimaginable status. And every single detail, I knew for a fact, had been meticulously curated to impress Chloe's family, her father's Wall Street acquaintances, her fashion world cousins, and her high society friends. And now there was me, the uninvited guest, the embarrassing, nobody brother. I walked into the ballroom just as the newlyweds made their grand second entrance after the dinner service had concluded and the doors were opened for the party. The MC announced them with such booming pomp and circumstance you would think literal heads of state had arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, Mr. and Mrs. Leo and Chloe Sterling Aethelgard. Everyone erupted into applause. Chloe did a slow motion, practiced twirl, her dress catching the light perfectly. Leo waved to the crowd like a politician who had just won an election. They took their places at the head table, flanked by gold-rimmed chargers and ivory menus. I didn't expect anyone to notice my entrance immediately, but someone did. A subtle ripple started somewhere near the massive ice sculpture by the bar. A few heads turned. Then a few more. Whispers broke out among the groomsmen. I didn't say a single word. I just moved with lethal, quiet certainty to an empty corner near a towering floral arrangement. A waiter, assuming I was a VIP guest based on the cut of my suit, immediately rushed over and offered me a glass of Dom Perignon. I took it, nodding my thanks. Leo saw me first. From all the way across the sprawling ballroom, mid-laugh with one of Chloe's wealthy cousins, his gaze swept the room and locked violently with mine. His smile instantly died on his face. For a fraction of a second, I could actually see the gears turning in his head, mentally replaying every single cowardly decision that had led him to this exact moment. I slowly raised my crystal glass in a quiet, mocking salute. He did not return it. He looked like he was going to be sick. I stayed completely in the shadows for a long time. I wanted to observe. I watched how they aggressively paraded their newly minted image. I watched how Chloe desperately clung to her father's arm when introducing him to important guests, her eyes constantly scanning the room to ensure particular people were looking at her. I watched as Leo, the guy who used to mercilessly make fun of country clubs, monogrammed towels, and trust fund kids now laughed just a little too loudly at a billionaire uncle's terrible joke. I watched as my own parents sat stiffly in the corner of the room, completely ignored by the bridal party, clearly out of place, while Chloe's family swarmed the dance floor like they owned the earth. I felt profoundly alone in a room packed with 300 people I once called family. And for a brief, agonizing moment, I almost set my glass down and walked out. I am not ashamed to admit that. I felt that familiar, awful pit in my stomach. That deep, childhood sting of rejection that no amount of corporate power or money ever truly numbs. The little voice in your head that whispers, "See? You're not one of them. You never were. You never will be." But then, I caught sight of someone I completely did not expect to see. My Aunt Vivian. She is my dad's older sister. A fiercely independent, Sharp-tongued woman in her late 60s who wears oversized geometric glasses, chain smokes like a 1970s French film director, and absolutely does not believe in mincing words. She hadn't been around for most of the wedding festivities because she lived out of state and had some kind of massive falling out with my mother years ago. But there she was, seated alone at a terrible table near the kitchen doors, her hair tied up in an elegant silk scarf, watching the entire spectacle with severely narrowed, calculating eyes. She spotted me in the corner. She didn't wave. She just slowly raised her glass of wine, locked eyes with me, and distinctly mouthed the words, "You don't belong here." I smiled a sad smile. For a second, I thought she meant it in the exact same toxic way Chloe had meant it. But then Aunt Vivian tilted her head, nodded toward the newlyweds twirling on the dance floor, curled her lip in utter disgust, and mouthed her next sentence with perfect clarity, "They don't know who you are." That was it. That was the turning point. It wasn't the public, explosive moment of revenge I had been fantasizing about. It wasn't some grand, movie villain corporate reveal where I stole the microphone. It was just that one look. That silent, profound confirmation that someone in this bloodline still saw me. Someone remembered that I wasn't always just the background character. I nodded back to her, drained my champagne, and decided that tonight was no longer about them. It was about me. I didn't need to physically interrupt their first dance to feel powerful. I didn't need to embarrass them screaming in front of their polished guests, because the war was already over, and I had already won. Quietly, elegantly, and permanently. I saw Chloe notice me a few minutes later. She was mid-toast, completely draped in diamonds, when her eyes flicked toward my corner. I saw the instant, unadulterated panic flash across her face. Her mouth literally froze on a smile that didn't finish forming. She immediately leaned into Leo, her manicured nails digging into his tuxedo jacket, whispering frantically into his ear. Leo glanced over again, his face pale, confirming that yes, the ghost was still haunting the room. I just stood there, calm, composed, sipping my drink. A few minutes later, I saw Leo detaching himself from the crowd and marching toward me. He didn't have his usual golden boy smile. He looked deeply cautious, like a bomb squad technician approaching a loose wire and praying to God it wasn't Liv. "Evan," he said, shoving his hands deep into his pockets to hide the shaking. You're actually here." "Sharp observation, Leo," I said casually, swirling the champagne. "Congratulations, by the way. It looked like a beautiful ceremony, from what I could see through my binoculars." He flinched, glancing around nervously and lowering his voice to a frantic hiss. "Bro, I thought we explicitly talked about this. You told me on the phone you weren't coming to the ceremony." "I didn't," I said smoothly. "You explicitly told me I wasn't welcome at the ceremony. You said your beautiful bride didn't want my face ruining her aesthetic pictures." He looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "Yeah, I know, but we agreed you'd just come later, keep a low profile." "No," I interrupted, my voice dropping to a deadly calm register. "You decided." I just stayed quiet. Leo looked over his shoulder, terrified that Chloe was watching. She absolutely was. I could see her glaring daggers at us from across the room, pretending to listen to a bridesmaid while entirely focused on our interaction. "You've got to understand the pressure I'm under, man," Leo pleaded, playing the victim. "This wedding, her family is huge. They are powerful people. There's literal press here. Photographers. Her dad's massive business partners. She just wanted everything to look a certain way. It's not personal." I smiled, showing teeth. "Oh, I completely understand the business dynamics, Leo." He sighed, a massive wave of relief washing over him. "Thank God. I knew you'd get it. But what Chloe doesn't know," I added softly, leaning in just an inch, "is that I own her father's business." Leo's relieved smile instantly froze, turning brittle and confused. "Come again?" I stepped slightly closer. Not enough to cause a physical scene, just enough to ensure my words were for him and him alone. "Aethelgard Hospitality, Richard Sterling's crown jewel. The source of all this arrogance. I am the majority shareholder now. I bought 51% of the voting stock 3 weeks ago." Leo blinked rapidly, like I had just started speaking fluent Mandarin. "No, you're not. Shut up, you're joking. You're an accountant." "Am I?" I raised an eyebrow, my voice perfectly level. "Because I was at the emergency board meeting on Friday." I sat directly across from Richard himself. He didn't look particularly thrilled to see the guy his daughter banned from her wedding photo sitting in his chairman's seat. Leo's face drained of all remaining color. He went a sickly shade of gray. He didn't say anything for several long, agonizing beats. I let the silence thicken. I let the absolute gravity of the reality sink into his bones. I let it sting. Then, I casually patted his shoulder, exactly the way a disappointed father pats a child. "You've got a lovely, expensive evening ahead of you, little brother. Try to enjoy it while it lasts." I turned around, set my empty glass on a passing waiter's tray, and walked out of the ballroom, leaving him paralyzed on the floor. Update 2. But walking out of the reception wasn't the revenge. That moment was just planting the seed. What came next was the harvest. After that night, I knew two things with absolute certainty. First, Chloe's family valued their untouchable image significantly more than they valued human integrity. Second, my brother had completely lost his spine somewhere between the proposal and the honeymoon planning. I could have gone nuclear at the reception. I could have grabbed the microphone, made a toast, and revealed the corporate takeover to the entire room. Public humiliation. But I didn't want a loud spectacle. I wanted permanent, structural consequences. So, I went back to my office on Monday morning and started digging. You would be genuinely shocked to discover how many rotting layers of corruption and debt sit just beneath a wealthy family's pristine public image. Chloe's family was nothing more than a fragile house of cards desperately disguised as a stone castle. Richard Sterling had positioned himself as an untouchable titan, but Aethelgard was fraying rapidly at the edges. Hidden debt obscured behind shell companies, toxic workplace lawsuits buried in quiet NDAs, and massive executive reshuffles every 6 months to hide the bleeding. And now, I legally held all the strings. I made a few phone calls. I contacted old colleagues, vicious industry insiders, a financial journalist I had helped out years ago who owed me a massive favor, and a forensic compliance investigator. I didn't even have to dig for the dirt, it was practically handed to me on a silver platter. It turns out, Richard had been aggressively pushing the board to approve a massive new executive contract. This contract would consolidate his absolute power and, more importantly, secure Chloe a permanent, salaried position as the head of a brand new charity initiative under the Aethelgard corporate umbrella. The Sterling Foundation for Global Elegance. It was a pure vanity title. No actual responsibilities, a 7-figure operating budget, and pure nepotism dressed up in pearls to make her look good in magazines. So, I blocked it, quietly, legally, and mercilessly. The board never even got to hold a vote. As the majority shareholder, I simply leveraged a standard control clause to immediately halt all non-urgent structural expansions pending a comprehensive fiscal stabilization audit. That is corporate speak for, not on my watch. You parasites. Exactly 1 week later, Richard called me again. This time, he didn't politely ask for a chat, he demanded an emergency meeting. I agreed. We met at an ultra-exclusive private club downtown. He arrived 20 minutes late, flanked by 2 nervous assistants, reeking of expensive scotch and desperation. I was already seated at the leather booth, sipping a black coffee, a single manila folder placed neatly on the table before me. "Evan," he barked, not even bothering to offer a handshake as he slid into the booth. "This little stunt has gone far enough." "Has it?" I asked, not looking up from my phone. "You are deliberately interfering in vital company business for petty, personal reasons," he hissed, his face turning red. "I am fiercely protecting shareholder value," I replied smoothly, finally meeting his angry eyes. "Which happens to be my legal fiduciary responsibility. My job is to generate returns, Richard, not to fund luxury wedding favors in the form of fake executive titles for your daughter." Richard slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "Is this entirely about Chloe? Are you really this fragile?" "This is about basic respect," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Something your daughter and my brother completely forgot about." He leaned in, his breath smelling of alcohol. "You honestly think this little boardroom power play is going to make them regret not inviting you to take a few pictures? You think this makes you a big man?" I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "Oh, Richard, I'm not here for their regret. Regret is useless to me." "Then what the hell are you here for?" I slowly closed the folder and slid it across the table toward him. "Consequences." I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked down at him. "This isn't personal, Richard, this is strictly business. But your family brought business directly to my doorstep the second they made it personal. Enjoy the audit." I left him sitting there, seething in impotent rage, but I wasn't quite done. Because true revenge isn't just about destroying your enemies, it's about reclaiming your own territory. So, I went back to my family. Not to grovel, not to beg for a seat at their table, but to formally reintroduce myself as the man who owned the room. I started with Aunt Vivian. I called her and thanked her for that look she gave me at the reception. We ended up talking on the phone for 4 hours. She told me incredible things I never knew about our family dynamic. She told me how my dad used to constantly lean on me to keep the peace because I was the easy one. How Leo had always been aggressively protected from the consequences of his actions, even when he completely destroyed things. She told me about my mom's constant anxiety, the suffocating silence that followed every argument, and the way she swept Leo's failures under the rug for the sake of the family image. And I told her everything. The firm, the massive wealth, the Aethelgard takeover, the betrayal. Vivian didn't gasp. She didn't offer toxic positivity. She just took a long drag of her cigarette and said, "Well, honey, it is about damn time somebody finally shook this family's tree." With Vivian's help, things moved incredibly fast. She helped me quietly reconnect with a dozen extended family members who had been intentionally distanced by Chloe's snobbery. Cousins who were exhausted by the Leo and Chloe show. Uncles who had been quietly excluded from holiday events because their cars weren't nice enough. Eventually, even my mom called me late one night, her voice soft, broken, and unsure. "I didn't know you had built all of this, Evan." She cried softly. "I didn't know you were hurting." "You never asked, Mom," I replied, not unkindly, just stating a fact. "You're right," she sobbed. "I failed you. We all did." That admission meant more to me than a billion-dollar portfolio. Little by little, the entire family dynamic shifted. It wasn't explosive. It was subtle. A cousin invited me to a barbecue without adding the usual, "I don't know if Chloe would be okay with the venue." My mom stopped making frantic excuses for Leo's behavior, and started openly saying, "No, that was incredibly selfish of him." Even my dad, who hadn't spoken a word to me in weeks, sent me a text that simply read, "You have always been the strongest one of us. I am so sorry I was too blind to see it." Meanwhile, the Sterling family was rapidly unraveling. Chloe's fake charity initiative was publicly and humiliatingly shelved. Rumors started surfacing in high society circles, nothing overtly scandalous, just the kind of toxic financial whispers that instantly keep wealthy donors from signing checks. Richard's position on the board became untenable as the audit revealed massive discrepancies. And Chloe found herself entirely on the outside of the very elite circles she had sacrificed my humanity to climb into. Not because I was actively spreading rumors about her, but because she forgot the golden rule of high society: when you treat people like dirt because you think you own the building, you better make damn sure someone else didn't just buy the deed. It took exactly 93 days from the night of the wedding reception to the moment the final domino fell. I was sitting in my office, sipping an espresso from a standard capsule machine. Chloe had once brutally mocked me for it at a brunch, laughing and waving her manicured hand, saying, "You still drink that peasant water." I smiled at the memory as my office phone rang. It was Aethelgard's VP of Finance. His tone was strictly professional, but heavily strained. "Evan," he said carefully, "we have had another round of massive board restructuring requests from Mr. Sterling. There is significant pushback from the institutional investors." I already knew. I had personally orchestrated the pushback. "I understand," I said mildly. "What is the current situation?" He paused, clearing his throat. "Given the total lack of confidence from the shareholders, the massive compliance issues uncovered by your audit, and recent severe financial turbulence, there is a formal motion for an immediate leadership transition." There it was, the bloodless, corporate execution. "What are the board's expectations?" I asked, knowing exactly what the answer was. "They would like you to step in as interim chairman of the board, effective immediately, while Mr. Sterling is placed on indefinite administrative leave." I leaned back in my leather chair, looking out over the city. "I accept." William Sterling was escorted out of his own building by security that afternoon. His access to key financials was permanently suspended. His loyal executive assistants were immediately reassigned to the basement archives. It wasn't a screaming tabloid scandal. It was just a quiet, brutal descent into irrelevance. The specific kind of corporate death reserved for arrogant men who drastically overplayed their hands and fatally underestimated the quiet guy in the room. And as for Chloe, the social invitations dried up instantly. Her planned gala appearances were quietly unlisted from society pages. Glossy magazine features that had once spotlighted her visionary charity work suddenly moved on to newer, less toxic names. Her expensive PR team abruptly stopped returning her frantic calls. The final nail in the coffin came when Aethelgard officially issued a press release announcing the total dissolution of the Sterling Foundation for Global Elegance. Her dream vanity project, set to launch with a massive 5-star gala in Milan, was completely vaporized. I didn't even have to sign a paper. The finance committee axed it themselves to appease me. Chloe tried to save face on Instagram, posting a long, weeping video about how heartbroken she was that unforeseen internal corporate changes had delayed her philanthropic vision. The comments were turned off. The likes were pitiful. A week later, the account went private. I didn't need to see her cry. I just needed her to know she lost. Leo finally reached out to me about 2 months into my tenure as chairman. He didn't call. He sent a pathetic, carefully worded text. "Hey man. I know things have been incredibly tense. Any chance we can grab a coffee and talk?" Curiosity won out. I agreed. We met at a neutral, brightly lit cafe downtown. No cameras, no family, no luxury aesthetic. Leo looked exhausted. The arrogant, confident grin he used to wear like a mask was completely gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. "Evan," he said, pulling me into a stiff hug that I absolutely did not return. "Man, it's been a crazy ride, huh?" "Something like that," I said, sitting down. He didn't even bother ordering a drink. He just leaned over the table, wringing his hands. "Look, I have been doing a lot of therapy, and thinking about everything that went down with the wedding. I just wanted to say, I didn't handle things the best way." "That is the understatement of the century, Leo," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. He swallowed hard. Yeah. Fair. I was just under so much pressure from her family. You didn't just exclude me. I interrupted, cutting through his excuses like a knife. You profoundly disrespected me. You stood by silently while your wife treated me like a repulsive footnote in our own family. You let her banish me to the shadows because you were too much of a coward to stand up to a bully. I didn't know it would hurt you that bad. He pleaded. You knew? I fired back, leaning in. You just didn't care enough to do a damn thing about it because it was easier for you. Leo went completely silent. He stared at his hands for a long time. I didn't realize how far you had come, Evan. What you had built. I really thought you were just still doing your little mid-level finance thing, just keeping low-key. That is exactly the point, Leo, I said softly. You never once asked. You never cared who I was unless I was bailing you out of debt or dragging your mattress through the rain. He looked away, his eyes tearing up. Chloe said you made her uncomfortable. That you didn't fit the look she needed for the magazines. I was just trying to make her happy. I let out a harsh laugh. And you agreed with her. You sold your own brother out for a Vogue aesthetic. He didn't deny it. He just wiped his eyes. Look. I know things are incredibly messed up between us right now. But at the end of the day, we are still brothers. Are we? I asked. The question hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Leo looked down, tapping his fingers frantically against the wooden table. Can we ever fix this? Can we go back? I took a deep breath. I didn't need time to think. I just wanted the silence to crush him a little longer. I don't know, Leo, I said honestly. Trust isn't a light switch you can just flip back on, and I am never going to pretend this didn't permanently alter how I view you. But? He asked, a pathetic glimmer of hope in his eyes. But, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat, I am open to seeing if a new version of you exists. Eventually. It wasn't forgiveness. Not even close. But it was a boundary. If you ever manage to stay married to her, I added, looking down at him, make sure you don't completely disappear into her shadow. I walked out of the cafe, leaving him alone with the check. As for Chloe, we have never spoken a single word to each other since the wedding. I did see her one last time, though. It was at a massive industry charity event I was hosting as part of Aethelgard's new corporate direction focused on sustainable luxury, not elitist vanity. It was a quiet, incredibly tasteful affair. No flashy press, just real substance. She showed up with her disgraced father, clinging to the absolute outer edge of the VIP crowd like a ghost desperately trying to haunt a house she had been violently evicted from. She looked thinner, her smile strained and fake. She didn't dare come over to my table, but I felt her watching me all night, and for once, I let her look. Because this time, I wasn't the invisible, embarrassing brother shoved into the background. This time, I stood exactly where I was always meant to be, at the absolute center of the room, calm, confident, and completely unapologetic. As the night finally wound down, I stepped up to the podium to give the closing remarks. I looked out into the crowd and saw my parents sitting at the absolute best table in the house. My mom was beaming with tears in her eyes, my dad was clapping fiercely, and Aunt Vivian was sitting next to them, raising a glass of scotch and giving me that same proud, knowing nod. I realized something profound in that moment. True revenge isn't loud. It isn't petty. It isn't about screaming, crying, or making a desperate scene to prove you matter. It is about quietly reclaiming your own narrative. It is about moving strategically, with absolute grace, and ensuring that the next time an arrogant bully tries to crop you out of the picture, you already own the camera, the gallery, and the entire damn building it hangs in.